You mentioned the word grit. What does grit mean to you?
The ability to get punched in the face and be able to stand up and say, "Thank you, sir, can I have another?" That's a short answer. Accepting failure and dusting yourself off and moving on. A lot of people, either they have perhaps low self-esteem, or perhaps they are surrounded by people that may not encourage their goals. The journey to entrepreneurship is very hard. And when things aren't successful immediately, and I could think of a multitude of, examples or, things I've seen with people I've coached over the years.
Hey everybody, this is Joe Siegel, your real estate, asset protection, and estate planning lawyer here in Florida. I'm here today at the Trust This Studios with Robert Vazquez. And Robert is part of our Master Series today. I want to talk to him about where he's been, what he's done, where he's been successful, maybe some of his failures that he'll share with you guys, because he's been extremely successful at what he's done. And that's part of our job here at Trust This during these podcasts. Is I want to introduce you, the audience. If you are an entrepreneur, if you're a small business owner, if you're a real estate investor, professional, I want you to learn from the best of the best who are out there, who have done this, who came before you. And maybe you can learn something, because that's been my biggest frustration working with clients. I set up their business, I set up their structures, I get them going, and I put them out there, and then they sink because they get bad business partners. They just don't know what to do next. They don't hire well. They don't fire well. They don't have processes and procedures. They don't have habits of highly successful people. So I want you to take away from these interviews, when we talk to these folks in these master series, people like Robert today that you're going to hear from, I want you to listen to them carefully, take some nuggets away, and maybe look inside yourself and think about what you may be not doing well and how you could do it better. So with that, Robert, I want to welcome you to today's show. Why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself to everybody, sort of introduce yourself.
Well, Joe, number one, thank you for having me on your show. And I look forward to providing value to you and your guests. And literally everything you said of what not to do is literally what I've done. All right. Every single mistake that you can possibly make, I've made. Part of that was failing to reach out to get proper counsel. Part of that was thinking I knew a little bit more than I did, and thinking, you know what, I did a little bit of a Google search, I can figure this out. And, part of it's being a little too hard-headed, and just with this whole mentality of I could do it and I can figure it out. And I think that anyone in business who has enough grit will eventually become successful. I think that most failures occur not because people failed, it's because they failed to proceed. Failure is a part of success. And I say this all the time, there's a difference between failing and failure. Okay, failure is just bottom line, I got hit in the face, I don't want to get hit in the face again, and I want to walk away. Failing is the process, it's the journey to get to whatever success is. And by any means, I'm not anywhere where I need to be, because anytime I start getting close to where I want to be, I keep pushing that marker further and further and further. But again, I'm Robert Vazquez. I run Countrywide Capital Group and Countrywide Group of Companies. We are a totally vertically integrated company. And I hear a lot of people say that, but it's taken me 20 years of methodically planning and strategically kind of working towards a goal of having everything that I want in my ecosystem. And literally every part of the transaction, every part of the cogwheel we have, everything from a title company in 18 states. We're a real estate broker. We're mortgage brokers. We're hard money lenders. We're general contractors. We're brokers, builders, and developers. So we're doing everything from land entitlements, subdivisions, hotels, apartment complexes, single family homes, and our regular traditional business. So all of that did not come easy. A lot of people look at what we do and they go, hell, that, we want to replicate that. And that's good, because to an extent, imitation is the best form of flattery. And I do the same thing. Every time I see someone that is in a position where I like to be at, I do everything I can to try to get in or around the air that they're in. And that's just really the secret of my success and everyone in my circle is just trying to level up your game, and the level up your game also means, leveling up your circle, right? If you're the biggest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room.
You said a lot of things there I want to dig into. The first one, you mentioned the word grit. What does grit mean to you?
The ability to get punched in the face and be able to stand up and say, "Thank you, sir. Can I have another?" That's a short answer. Accepting failure and dusting yourself off and moving on. A lot of people, you know, either they have perhaps low self-esteem, or perhaps they are surrounded by people that may not encourage their goals. The journey to entrepreneurship is very hard. And when things aren't successful immediately, and I could think of a multitude of, examples, or, things I've seen with people I've coached over the years. When you have, for example, a husband who wants to be very, very successful and wants to do something entrepreneurial, and he may make a small attempt at doing so, but it's not successful right off the bat. Then you have the wife who may not be as supportive, or maybe she was supportive for the first or second attempt, but not the third. And that can cause some issues. And that person's just like, hey, you know what? I can't do this anymore. You're right. Let me go back to work at, Home Depot, as an example. And there's nothing wrong with Home Depot or any other organization. The world, and I say this without, any offense, but the world needs ditch diggers. The world needs guys that work at ice cream shops and pizza shops and so on and so forth. And I don't mean to say that in any discouraging way, but grit is the ability to be able to get punched in the face over and over and over and be able to stand up and say, I'm going to keep going.
You also said you don't like to be the smartest guy in the room. Surround yourself with people, learn. How do you find yourself? How do you find those smarter people to be around? And how do you know when it's time to move on or to move up?
When you seem to be the one person who's providing more value in a room than you're receiving, it's a perfect example that you're probably in the wrong room, because you've become the biggest fish. And much like the example of a fish will only grow to the size of their environment, right? You take a shark you catch in the ocean, you put it in a fish tank, that shark will only grow so much because they're limited to their environment. And over the years, I've learned to put myself in bigger rooms. I pay 6 figures a year, and I travel, and I spend 6 figures a year to travel to events and to be able to mastermind and network with people that are, doing things that I aspire to be doing. I'll give you an example. I became a pilot. Okay. I like to fly. I love to fly. Still scares the shit out of me. Don't get me wrong. But I love doing it. Why? Because it makes me uncomfortable. And use this as an example because, I want to buy an airplane. And then when I'm speaking to somebody who has an airplane, he's talking about upgrading his airplane. And then that guy's talking about how he's on his 5th jet. That's a perfect example going, I'm in the right room. I need to be in the room where that guy's at. And then understanding and learning the problems that are associated at that level. And that's something that, there's truly levels to life, and there's levels in this game. And to understand that once you reach a certain income level, it's not necessarily about, as crazy as this may sound to some of your viewers, but that's a problem when you start making enough money that you have to then, as an example, buy an airplane, not because you can necessarily afford to buy it, or because, you're going to be flying and jet setting all over the place. It's a good tax avoidance vehicle if you're doing it the right way. And you can also make money with leasing and so on and so forth. But, the way I look at it is, would I rather pay a large check to the IRS, or would I rather have an airplane that I can thoroughly enjoy? I choose the latter.
Yeah. No, I've thought lately about getting a plane and getting my pilot's license, but it takes a long time, and it's a lot of work. How do you find time for doing things like that?
It's a good question. And this is where I'm checking myself again. In 2019, I had probably one of the better years. We hit 5,000 fastest growing companies, top 20 Orlando companies, and I did 3 Ironman competitions. And I was single, and I enjoyed being single. So I was also incorporating a lot of dating, which also means you got to go out and multiple dates, and then you're doing this and you're doing that. My point is that you can find the time. The same people that say, how do you have the time to go to the gym? Well, I don't sleep 12 hours a day. How about that? I'm okay with 4 or 5 hours. I'm okay going to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. You can make time for the things that you really, truly want to do. That's a simple answer. So when I was doing my pilot's license, I would wake up early in the morning, especially with Florida weather. Florida is a very unique place to learn how to fly because, by the time I leave my house and I get to the airport, you start learning to become a weatherman. If you start flying, you'll understand what I mean by this. You're literally a weatherman. You're constantly looking at the weather. You're looking at clouds. You become really boring in certain circles because you're like, that's a cumulus cloud over there, and I could fly right around here, but, by the time you get out there, you may have a little bit of time to fly. And by the time you're coming back for your second round of that day, the weather can completely shift and change. So you have to adapt your schedule. Again, being in control of your own schedule to the extent that you can, and like, for example, you have a hearing to go to, you can't say, "Judge, I'm so sorry, but I've got a flight. I've got scheduled." No, it doesn't work that way. You just got to play around your schedule. So I think anything and everything is doable. I was able to ride 75 miles in the morning on my bike, come back, work 12 hours a day, still be able to go out and go on a date. And if you're married, same thing, date your wife, right? Date your spouse, date your partner. You're still able to do the things you want to do, but most people get comfortable. And as my mentor tells me, the only way to coast is downhill. Well, most people do, especially entrepreneurs. They become victims of the "it's me time." I worked all day, and now it's my time. I'm going to sit on the couch and I'm going to relax as I deserved it. I'm going to tune out to the TV. Yeah, that's what happens. Or you can pick up a book and educate yourself, or you can think about planning out your next morning, or you can say, you know what, I'm going to eat, I'm going to spend time with my family, or whatever you got to do. I'm going to self-educate myself. I'm going to work out, because tomorrow morning, early in the morning, I'm going to set my schedule. I'm going to set my intention. This is what I'm going to do. Everything is possible. The question is whether or not you're going to make that hard decision. That's a simple answer. It's easier said than done.
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing. I think, a lot of people sit here and listen to us talk and they're like, there's no way I could ever do that, because, and they're going to put excuses out there, not reasons. It's excuses. And some of the best advice I hear from the entrepreneurs I talk to on this podcast, it's advice like you're giving it. You set time for growth, you set time for learning, and you don't waste time with frivolous activity. For instance, one of my guests, he said the best time in my car is not listening to music, it's listening to podcasts, it's listening to books about growing and learning. And the music's not changed. The music I like hasn't changed since I was 13 years old. So why am I still listening to the same music 40 years later when I could be learning something new 40 years later? So what is a routine for you that you wish you had started earlier in your journey?
Fortunately, I had the opportunity and the privilege to serve in our military, and lessons that I learned in the military is something that's been kind of ingrained in me. So working out, especially early in the morning, is something that I still do. I remember being in the military, being 18 years old, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and being freezing and in the pitch of dark, just complete darkness, and just thinking to myself, I am America's first line of defense, and while most people were sleeping, I'm training my body, I'm training my mind to be a weapon to protect our country. And as silly as that may sound to some of your viewers, that's something that gave me this mental kind of clarity, where I looked at my body not only as just as a vessel to say, I'm going to do something, productive. People think, hey, soldier, in the military, you're trained that as a soldier, you are a professional, soldier. And that's something that I carried through the military. So getting out of the military, when I found myself at my lowest of lows, when I was partying too much, because, I got out of the military and I was very fortunate. I got into the mortgage industry. And before I knew it, I'm 20 years old. I'm making 20, 30, 40, $50,000 a month living in Miami. The party lifestyle does seem to catch up to you. And I had an amazing time while that lasted. It's something that, I don't necessarily regret to an extent, because there's a lot of lessons that I learned from that. But I wasn't working out anymore. At that point, I was drinking and I was partying and I was having the best time. Was I the most successful I was in my career? No, I made a lot of money, but I didn't have a lot of education. I learned, now that opportunity shifted my mindset. Okay. And sometimes all someone needs is that shift in a mindset. But again, that's just the beginning step, because the way I look at it is, you're either educated in the thought process of in the belief of making money, okay, or you're not. I grew up in an environment where, the mortgage industry wasn't something that was available. The finance industry, the things that I'm doing right now, is not something that I ever thought was humanly possible, nor that I think was really achievable. I thought I was just going to get a job and I was going to try to support my family and whatever that job is. And I think most people get stuck in that routine. I mean, hell, people right now are burying themselves in college debt for a major that they're not even getting a job in, or it's difficult to get a job in, or by the time they get that job, it doesn't even support their bills, let alone their student debt. So I think most people are just happy to get a job initially, and then they get stuck in a routine. How the mortgage industry and the job that I had in the mortgage industry, that really changed my entire life. It changed my trajectory, it changed my perception, my state of mind, and I started making a lot of money. But again, money without proper financial education, financial literacy is a combination, it's a recipe for disaster. So, having this, shifting your mindset is one thing, continuing to learn and evolve as an entrepreneur, that's where I believe you get to step up to the next level. Okay. Long answer. I hope I answered that because I went on a tangent there. But I think, waking up early in the morning, reading my pod or listening to my podcasts, my audibles while driving to maximize and be efficient. That's something that I think, a lot of entrepreneurs do. Hell, oftentimes I'll sit in my vehicle, I'll drive 40 minutes to my office, and I didn't realize I didn't even turn the radio on just because I'm lost in thought
Mhm.
and constantly in my head, just kind of, you know, I don't need a movie. I don't need a TV. I don't need, and again, don't get me wrong. I like my downtime and I do enjoy my movies here, but, my shows, here and there, but not as often as I used to because I like what's kind of going on in here. And I'm constantly plotting and planning what my next step's going to be. What I've realized to an extent is life is like a chess game. And sometimes I'm just in my mind working out a million different variables of what could happen and then how that spawns off the million other variables how that could be. So when something happens, it's going to happen to an extent to the way I kind of thought or planned it out. And it seems a little nuts, but the longer you're into this entrepreneur game, you'll realize that what you focus on grows. And if you focus on success, you focus on business, the likelihood of you being successful is going to be greater than if you focus on the problems and the issues at hand. Like I tell my staff, if you're going to come to me with a problem, come to me with a couple of different solutions, because more often than not, you're going to be able to find the answer without me having to give you the green light for it. So oftentimes they come in here, I'm like, okay, that sounds like the solution. You just want me to give you a thumbs up because you got it. But anyhow, I hope that I answer that long question.
No, that's good. Well, but it takes me to, you said you had a mind shift, and I think that's it. I would call it the entrepreneurial paralysis. I think that's what they call it in E-Myth Revisited. So what was you had this mind shift, you had this entrepreneurial paralysis while you were young, you're young, party in Miami, in the mortgage industry, and all of a sudden you go, you know what, I've got a great opportunity here. What do you see as your first action, the first thing you did after you realized that to actually start acting on your mind shift? What
Well,
took you your first step away from that?
that's a two-part kind of, well, it's a multiple phase or multiple kind of ways I can answer that. Number one, let me kind of take a step back and just state this, that you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. I've spoke in front of 500 plus people crowd. All right, and if I'm going to say a message, here's one thing I realized is that you can't be all things for all people. And I believe that people that want to be successful tune into frequencies. And this is something that I've read over years, and this is what has allowed me to recognize that. What I realize is whether that frequency be your favorite radio station, whatever the case is, you're going to tune into a message that's meant for you. So I can have two people in a room sitting in this chair and this chair, and I can say the same message. That person's going to resonate with my message, and he's going to tune into what I'm saying because we're on the same frequency. And the other person's going to say, this isn't for me. Okay. That happens all the time in sales or whatever the case is. You can tell people about, there's a lot of great books written on The Secret, right? Literally the book, The Secret, a million different variations thereof. People are going to tune into the message at whatever point in their life that they're ready to receive that message. And if they're not ready to receive that message, then that message is not for them. So the shift in the mortgage industry just allowed me to recognize that a person at the time now, again, I was going to college in the military. I joined the military at 17 years old, turned 18 in basic training. I started going to college, Central Texas College, while I was in the military. Before we went to Iraq, I had to stop my going to school because we were being deployed, which didn't happen until a year and a half later. So I did what I could to educate myself. Nevertheless, school education is an entrepreneurial education, right? In my belief, it doesn't matter what you're doing. No one's going to teach you to become a business owner, business administration, business management. They're teaching you to be employees of other companies, right? So working for that company, which was Ameriquest Mortgage Company, largest subprime lender in the country, sponsor Major League Baseball, NFL, commercials, etc. allowed me to understand that I can make more money than a doctor can. And while most people could say that's insane, and here I am, 19 years old. By the end of year one, I'm making more money than most doctors, not specialty doctors, not plastic surgeons, and so on and so forth. But I know a lot of doctors, and I made more money than they did at 19 years old. Between 19 and 20, I mean, hell, my first quarterly bonus was $75,000 on top of my commission that month, which I don't know what it was, 50, 60,000. I made $100,000+ when in a month, 130, whatever it was, in my before I was 21 years old. You know what? How stupid that is to give that to a person with no financial education. It's like, bottles on me. Let's go. We're going to party it up. So the first shift was understanding that I can make money. That doesn't mean I'm going to keep the money. And that lesson I learned later on. We're talking about some mistakes. Now, there are certain things that I can control. There's certain things I can't. I was 25 years old. Excuse me. I was 23 years old when I bought my first house. I was very proud. I had three kids. No, I had four kids at the time. I had four boys, and I was 23 years old. And by the time I was 25 years old, I lost my house to foreclosure. The 2008 market hit, and
Wow.
that was the most humbling experience I've ever had in my life. I felt ashamed. I felt, like a loser. I felt like, what am I going to do? I had to pack up my family. I didn't know what to say. It was a very, very heavy time. Still brings up emotions every time I think about it, because I think about the feeling that I had, packing up my bags or having to hear that knock, not knowing if that was a sheriff or what was going to happen. And that's actually what led me into the things that I did with respect to distressed real estate. So a very disastrous situation turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
So how did you turn that around? What was so you just got a major punch in the gut, punch in the face, coming back to this grit. What did you do next?
I say this jokingly. I don't mean to put myself down, but you heard the term that you're too big to fail. I was too dumb to quit. I was just hard headed. I didn't know what else to do. The market tanked. The 2008 recession hit. Taylor Beam Whitaker went down. I've spoke about this for many years. The world literally collapsed. If you had an 850 credit score and solid financials, and you were a plastic surgeon making $15 million a year, I couldn't let you borrow $200,000 for a house. No one was lending. It happened so quick, and there was this lull, this pause in the marketplace. I missed my first mortgage payment, and I think it was 6 or 7 months later, the foreclosure process was quick. This was before the onslaught of
Yep.
these mortgage foreclosures. So for me to lose my house so quick, if I was a second or third wave, I could have potentially stayed in my house for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as many
Yep.
people did. But me losing the house so quickly made me question, how did this happen? And how did this happen so quickly? And I wanted to understand why, when I was trying to negotiate with my bank, they were telling me the things they were telling me. And I was like, wait a minute. So you're the servicer. Now, meanwhile, I was in the mortgage business. I should know this. But here I am being a originator. Now, at the time, I was 23 years, 25. I had multiple offices. I had a bunch of loan officers who were working, I just had a good team. We were making a lot of money. And my cash reserves went away very, very quickly, because I was living in a manner in which that water spigot was never going to shut off. Okay. These are the learning lessons in life, build a war chest. That's one of the biggest lessons I've ever heard or received. But understanding the way that the banking system works, understanding CDOs and MBSs, RMBSs, residential mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps, credit default obligations, understanding this, understanding the levels, understanding whole loan operators, understanding camel ratings with banks. These are things that I literally spent 20 plus hours a day studying while trying to figure out how to make money. So when people say they can't do things, bullshit. The things I did to try to make ends meet, to try to pay rent, to try to put food on the table while literally working 20 hours a day. I scoured the FDIC's website. I learned, I educated myself on what camel ratings were. I started learning how to go after banks that with a 3+ camel ratings that were being in danger of being taken over by the FDIC. I started learning how to read their daily filings, and then started contacting the banks and trying to figure out, with, by the way, no money whatsoever, literally no money whatsoever, on how to trade debt. So I went from originating debt as a broker to being the bank overnight. My first successful trade put me on the map for me, and I made 7 figures. So I went from losing everything to my first trade. That one non-performing note portfolio had more loans in there than most real estate offices will do in terms of transactions in their entire career. Okay, over 5,000 loans in one pop. You know what it
Wow.
is to go from, zero to hero, overnight. And I didn't blow that money. I was extremely conservative at that point, and I just started learning more and more. And with every single trade that I did, I always asked the question, because one of the things I realized when I was trying to, essentially, this is fancy arbitrage. You're talking about wholesaling properties. I started wholesaling portfolios. That's all it was. So when I started going back and backwards to try to add wholesaling to my business, I did not like the business. I was like, this is way too much work for such small profit. This is a grind. This is a job. And that was my mistake to even dabble in that, because I saw all these people doing it. And that's a shiny object syndrome. I'm going, I should have just stayed in my lane, because I'm playing at a much higher level, making a lot more money with the same effort. Again, naturally, the entrepreneur in me, when I'm speaking to a fund who has the ability to raise capital, and I asked them, what are you guys going to do with this debt? Okay. They said, well, we'll figure it out. We're going to, again, these are entrepreneurs that have Wall Street access to capital that don't know what they're doing either. Okay. Now, not everyone, just the funds that I was fortunate enough to get a hold of. So when I asked the question, what are you guys going to do with this debt? They go, well, we're going to find some realtors, and we're going to, we're going to assign REO properties to them. I go, I've got them. And they go, you do? I said, absolutely. And then from there, I built out a whole nationwide network. Okay. So I worked backwards. I literally jumped off the cliff and I built the airplane on the way down. Now there's kind of fast forwarding to that first successful non-performing note trade. In the midst of me losing my house and understanding that entire process, I started doing short sales. Nobody knew what short sales were at the time. And at the time, I was very, very fortunate, because again, I lost my house so quickly that in that process of me negotiating with the bank, I started to learn a couple of things that didn't work for me, but they worked for the next person. The first person I helped out, I was able to help them out. And then the second person, and the third person. At that point, you want to talk about the easiest marketing. I spent $0 on ads, on leads, and I had thousands and thousands and upon thousands of people giving me their business nationwide. LinkedIn was my favorite tool back in the day. I lived on it. The same realtors that gave me business, I negotiated on their behalf. They kept the commissions. I kept the flip. I started an office in the Philippines. At the same time, I was reading the book, The 4-Hour Work Week. I was deploying the strategies that the book was teaching, which only gave me affirmation, right? I'm like, oh, wow, I'm actually already doing this. So it kind of, led me to believe, hey, I could do this. I'm on the right track. We created a very, very systematized process. It was amazing. The software that we invested in, everything from time stamping, every time we made a phone call. I mean, literally every piece of software that we did not only helped me make a lot of money, it also saved my ass towards the end. But anyhow, we processed thousands of short sales. The same realtors that gave me business are the same realtors that I use as my network, they then became REO agents. So it worked in our favor. The following question, after we had the agents assigned, I go, what are you guys going to do with these with these distressed properties? You go, well, we're going to renovate them. I go, do you guys have a construction company? They go, no, we're looking for that. I go, I happen to have a construction company. That evolved into me doing 3,500 remodels for banks across the Southeast region United States. I never done that before. Okay. I figured it out and I became very, very good at it. They called me the Cuban cost cutter for a reason, triple C. All right. So that's essentially how I evolved into opening up a construction company. So Countrywide Realty Partners, my real estate brokerage, originally was an asset management company. Okay, providing essentially sub asset management services for the larger institutions. Vazquez Construction Development evolved into what it is, but it originally started off doing bank remodels. Originally, I bought a construction company, and the gentleman it was just right timing. The gentleman was going back to Colombia. I said, I'll buy your company as long as we can keep your license in place. That worked in our favor, and we made a lot of money doing that. So again, I say this all the time, a necessity stimulates creativity. And when you see opportunity and you don't take advantage of that opportunity in an ethical manner, okay, that's your responsibility. It's your fault. If someone's telling you right now, I've got $100, I want to give it away right now, and you need that $100, you don't ask for it. You don't say, what can I do for it? That's your responsibility. It's your fault for not taking action. I'm just a person that sees an opportunity and asks a million questions to see how I could squeeze every last little drop out of that orange, so to say. And that's just something that worked in my favor. It's not
Well,
genius. It's just
that's one
curiosity.
thing I want to ask you. So when you said, I've got a construction company, I've got realtors, did you really have them, or did you say, I got it, and then you went and built it to have it?
That's what I said. I said, I'll figure it out. I said, I got that. Because the thing is, everyone knows Willie the handyman. So I said, no, I know a guy. I could do that. And then I built it out from there. And be honest with you, I built the entire thing off of LinkedIn and Craigslist. I would literally go to a new market and I would say, and I would just type in under services, drywall repair, plumber, lawn care. And at the time, you want to talk about how easy it is to get contractors to work for you. The entire financial market has completely collapsed, which is to say that, national builders stopped building, everyone stopped building. So you had extremely highly talented individuals with no work. And here I am saying, guys, you're going back to work. It was very easy to get very, very good skilled labor management to say, hey, I have the crews. So it wasn't like I had to go to Alabama, I had to go here, I had to go there and go person to person. Once I was able to find my one or two or three people, per given market, they already had the subs. And I would task them with the responsibility of saying, okay, this is your responsibility. This is what I need. I need photos. I need that. This is the format that the bank wants it in. And then I either follow the bank's format or recreated a format for the bank to follow.
So as the REO market matured and the banks sold off their inventory, and they still have inventory, don't get me wrong, but how have you shifted over the years with that sea change again?
Again, it's just adapt and overcome. When the remodeling the spigot turned on, we made so much money doing that our personal kind of flip business was put on the wayside because, again, it's a mathematical equation. I can put this much money and risk it, or if I were to put out, let's say, as an example, $20,000 for a bank remodel that I know it's going to pay us 60 guaranteed. And I say that loosely because we got burned on a few invoices, a very, very small percentage in relation to what we made. So it's easy to write that off. But it was a lot easier for me to say, I'm going to put 20 per property, get 60 back. This is an easy metric. It's like, if you know you're going to put $20 into a vending machine, it's going to spit you back 60. I think you're going to do that every single day. You're just going to sit there feeding it money. Okay. So that was low hanging fruit. The shift, we've started focusing our energies on that because it was low hanging fruit. Once we were able to do that, I know that I could make a lot more money off of all these opportunities than me making a 3 to 30 cent, 15-cent spread on a portfolio. But it might take me, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, but I'm making 7-figure rips per trade. The downside to that business, it's almost, and I hate to say it like that, but this is the way the market was. We've all seen drug movies, and imagine as if the bank was my Pablo Escobar and I'm the one guy in the middle and everyone wants to talk to Pablo Escobar. I go, I'm sorry, you have to go through me. Everyone, and I mean everyone, did everything they could to try to go around me to go directly to Pablo. But Pablo's my buddy. We're friends. But you did have a few savvy investors that made the condition that, hey, my offer will only go through if I meet Pablo. And what happens? They cut you out. I got tired of that, and it was just a constant. The amount of money I didn't make because of the fear that I had of people trying to figure out my sources was probably greater than I did make. Okay, and that's the shift that I made in the future. That scarcity mindset I don't have anymore. You're going to screw me. You're going to screw me. That happens in business. Okay, but I focus more on the, what would happen if you didn't screw me? We can make a lot more money together. Now, again, the few people that were able to find out my sources, they made tens of millions of dollars. Some few local outfits here in Orlando, which I don't do business with, and they've reached out to me in the past, and I'm like, click, hey, we need these services. Click, just respectfully speaking, I know who you are as a person, and that says more to me, than anything than this is more than I care to entertain anymore. Anyhow, evolve. Now, let's take a step back. At one point, the banks turned the spigot off, and they said, "Hey, Rob, a new mandate came down. Everyone needs to be a general contractor." And I'm like, "Well, why? We're doing bank remodeling, et cetera." They're like, "Okay, you're not the GC." And at the time, the company I had bought, the guy had already moved to Colombia. He was gone out of the picture. Okay, so after several weeks of us arguing with the bank, again, now the term general contractor is different. In Florida, very high standard to be a general contractor. In New Jersey, you walk in there, you apply, and you get it. In Texas, there's no general contractor license. You can build a house. You just need to hire a licensed plumber, electrician. Okay, with no roofing license, no general contracting license. That went, I spent almost 2 years of not working full time, completely unhealthy, drinking Red Bull and every other energy drink for almost 10 to 12 hours a day, studying every single book I could so I could take my GC exam. And by the time that I passed, I went back. Like again, I had made enough money and I built up enough of a war chest that I didn't have to work. Now I had a couple flips going, and I had a few of our projects which we had already signed contracts on, that I knew I had a pipeline of cash. By the time that I became a general contractor, the bank's like, "What? We got rid of that rule like 6, 7, 8 months ago, or whatever the case is. You didn't have to do that anymore." And I sat there. I was so pissed. I was like, "You got to be kidding me." But their portfolio was winding down. So this is a bank that had, when I say a bank, this is we had hedge funds, we had servicers we were working with. We had one bank that had 200,000 loans with a servicer. And as we were winding these loans down, and they transitioned, then they got rid of that servicer. But the asset manager, they said, "Hey, look, I don't care. You're leaving that job. We're boarding 50,000 loans with this other servicer. We want you to work for them. We want you to be our point of contact there." I fortunately work with that asset manager who goes, "Rob, I'm jumping over here." So again, by cultivating relationships, not only was I approved with this vendor, now I became approved with that vendor. And then I became approved with that vendor when they moved it across the board. So again, I cultivated additional relationships that gave us additional opportunities. But I looked at the shift in as quickly as that spigot was turned on, that spigot was turned off because they needed me to become a general contractor. So I thought to myself, I don't want to be at the mercy of someone else ever again. And that's where it evolved to like me started doing my own projects and developing my own projects and building my own houses. And that's where the birth of Vasquez Construction and Development and Vasquez Family Builders came about, is me being able to control my own destiny. Now, again, there's ebbs and flows in things, right? For example, a market increasing 300 basis points was a sucker punch and a real hit to the face that impacted our business, as it impacted many people's businesses. You have $1 trillion worth of commercial mortgages that are resetting. The amount of negative impact that's going to have on extremely good operators. You're having wonderfully run multifamily facilities and extremely good, skilled, talented operators that are not going to be able to debt service because their rates are going to adjust, right? So you have to shift with that market as well as best as you can. But ultimately speaking, we control our future as best as humanly possible, as best as anyone can predict. That's the reason why we have multiple entities. So if should one slow down, as all businesses, ebbs and flows, we have another one that's going to be able to pick up.
Yeah, I think that's a true requirement in today's environment. You've got to have cyclical and anti-cyclical businesses. For the longest time, I had, especially during the downturn, I had the bankruptcy side, and then on the foreclosures, we did bankruptcy and foreclosures, and foreclosure defense, and then on the other side, we had real estate closings. So when the economy was doing well, we did real estate closings and the title agencies, and when the economy was bad, we were doing bankruptcies and foreclosure defense on the other side. So I think anybody's got to look at and go, okay, well, I need businesses that can work in both environments when that's happening. You mentioned scarcity mindset, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit because I preach it a lot. It's scarcity versus abundance mindset. And what does that mean to you?
I think that if you believe, and that's a key word, is if you believe that everything's going to be okay, it will be. You have no idea how many times I've been in a position in the past where I was like, "Oh my God, I need this loan to go through. I need this loan to go through." Because I had that one deal and that's it. There was nothing else on my table, right? And I focused all my energies on that, and it was bad. It was a crisis. And when I somehow shifted my mindset to understand that there's an abundance of business in this world, and the more I speak to people, and the more I give my time, and the more I speak, and the more I just focus on just more and more and more and more and more. Literally, I'm looking at my bottle of water. It's almost the belief that, hey, when that water's done, I can just refill it, and that's going to be perfectly fine. And if I've got to walk a little bit further to refill it, that's going to be fine because it's going to be refilled. And if that water fountain gets pushed a little bit further, it's okay. I'm going to refill it, and it's going to be refilled, and it's going to be overflowing. And the more I think about that kind of energy, the more it happens. And I see it in real life. I see it, sometimes I can tell you right now, I work for myself. I've got multiple businesses. At some points, I feel like my employer is American Express. Because when you rack up $250,000 a month on American Express, sometimes I feel like that's my employer. I got to pay that sucker back. But that's my partner. I also look at my American Express. That's my business partner. They allow me credit to keep operations going and fund, to start construction material and so on. But sometimes I'm like, shit, that's my boss. I gotta pay the piper. Uh, and sometimes we'll have multiple projects going and something happens, and let's say we're expecting draws, and we're talking to the tunes of millions of dollars in projects. So cash flow management is extremely important. But sometimes material delays or theft or things happen, you're like, shit. We're talking this on multiple line items. Again, having a war chest is very important. But when I catch myself kind of going, oh my God, what am I going to do? I stop immediately. I go, it's going to be fine. And it always is. It always is. And I've been on that other end where I worried so much. And even though I knew this was like the birth of that mindset, I knew it. But there's a difference between knowing and reality, right? Reality is my mortgage is due tomorrow. I can't wish it will be paid tomorrow, right? But understanding that, what, it's going to be okay. My mortgage is due tomorrow and I'm going to figure it out. Something's going to happen. And just, again, you're tuning into the frequency that something's going to happen. And at least in my situation, in my case, when I focus on that positivity, hey, a phone call might happen, a lead might come in, a consultation or something, whatever the case is, something happens and I go, it's done, it's fixed. Why? Is it because, and I started analyzing it, is it because I was focusing on the positivity? Is it because I was focused on the abundance in this universe? And it sounds crazy because I'm not one of these, I hate to say it like this, but I'm not one of these yogi guys that are sitting there preaching with an incense burning and a candle at night. No, man, I'm a hardworking guy. I just believe that, positive things will happen and it will happen because I will it to be so. Okay. I know it's going to happen because I want it in my life. I deserve it in my life. I'm doing good things and it's just going to happen because there's no other exceptions. Nothing else is going to happen because I'm focusing on that frequency and that's it.
Well, and I think you said it too. You're constantly giving education. You're sharing your knowledge without expectation of getting something in return for that immediately. And that to me is the difference between a scarcity and an abundance mindset. Scarcity is, well, I'm going to tell you this, but you are going to give me something in return. Everything is a transaction and there's only so much. For me to win something, you have to lose something. And to me, that abundance mindset is, well, if you win, that's great. I'm going to win too. It may not be right now, but it's going to be eventually. It's going to come back to me eventually because there is plenty out there for everyone and plenty to grow for and grow from for everybody. And I really, it disheartens me when I hear people talking from a scarcity mindset because I'm like, no, there's plenty out there for all of us if we all work together, and we can make it. We can definitely make it. Where do you see the market going over and not too far out, by the end of just through 2025? Where do you see the REO market going? Where do you see just the market in general going for real estate?
Well, you mentioned REO, and the certain things I want to address right now. When the market tanked, we were in a position where no one wanted to touch real estate, and the shift between 2008 to now, you have now institutional investors that are gobbling up properties. They've realized as an investment vehicle, when you're talking about like annuities, right, an income stream. You're having institutional investors. Blackstone created the first residential mortgage-backed security, the RBS, which was outperforming many other investment vehicles. So the backlog of these foreclosures of all these REO properties, banks have realized that they have institutional investors that are willing to gobble up these properties. Okay, but one thing I've realized in the landscape of the REO business is that, again, there is, like any business, you fine tune your model, right? Blackstone, all these other companies have raised billions and billions of dollars. They deployed so much capital in the marketplace. I think they had 20,000 properties just in Florida alone. They bought all the kind of properties they can buy. And what do is they started fine tuning their model. Hey, we've realized that we don't want properties that back up to major streets. We don't want properties with pools. We don't want properties before this year built. So they refined their model. Now they're getting rid of these assets. So the likelihood of there being, or should there be another national kind of disaster, whatever the case is, a global recession, I think that from a significantly higher point of view that most people can understand, okay, from a top high money management standpoint, they're going to they're going to lock up all these properties. They're going to keep buying these things up, and they're going to start trading them in portfolios such as multifamily. That's the way I see, because it's been happening. I've been seeing that progression. Now you're having investors that have gone from buying hundreds of thousands of scattered lots to now the new trend is purpose-built subdivisions, B2R subdivisions. So now they're creating subdivisions that are specifically for rentals, right? And that is a higher asset class than buying a pool of other assets. Now, let's say you're buying a mix of Class A. What happens after a few years, and as you start putting more capital expenditures in these properties, they're going to start being traded as B and C properties, and they're going to start trading them to other managers, because from a high level point of view, and this is what I interviewed with Blackstone's Invitation Homes, because we sold a shit ton of properties to them as well. And when I understood their metric, it blew my mind, because again, you only can see things from your perspective. And what I mean by that is, as an investor, meaning a flipper, that's very, very loose for that word, because there's levels of investor. As a flipper, transactional business, same as wholesaling, I need to make $30,000 or more in a deal. I hear that all the time, right? Transactional business. If it's not 30, it's not for me. As opposed to a rental investor, a cash flow investor, I don't mind overpaying as long as I can achieve $200 or $300 a month, or whatever that case is. Different mindset, different investor. When you're managing billions of dollars and you're offering an investor a 6%, stable return, okay? Now, for a private investor, 6% is not worth my time. For a money manager, let's say a pension fund or whatever the case is, 6% stable, okay? As long as it's beating inflation, stable, all right? As long as it's not losing, good. They're going to charge 2% money management fee. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but 2% or 2.5% on billions of dollars, that's enough money to keep operations going. That's enough money for dividends, for bonuses, for salaries, for overhead, etc. So we're just at different levels, okay?
Mm.
That money manager can afford to overpay, because at that time, Invitation Homes, when you want to buy a property as an investor, hey, it's worth 100 grand. I got to buy it for 50 to put 30 into it, right? To turn around and sell it for that 30 delta. A landlord investor is going to take that same $100,000 property and say, I'm going to pay $85,000 for it, give myself a small little window to put some CapEx into it. I'll be at market value, right? My tenant will pay down the balance. I'll be fine. Invitation Homes, at the time, house is worth $100,000 repaired. We'll buy for 130. And then put rent money into it. Like, how the hell can you operate a business like that? It makes no sense, and you couldn't compete. Okay.
Right.
But when you understand their metric that they're making, as long as that property's making an 8.5% yield, okay, they're making money. So again, you can't compete with that. And when you also look at the competitive landscape, and I'm talking about the United States in general, and you look at the United Kingdom, and how many people own homes there, and what's the price point of those homes? We in America are becoming a nation of renters. Okay. That's where I see the future. I see the future being that it's going to continue to be increasingly unaffordable, short of a global crisis. Okay. That's going to reset pricing. Interest rates are becoming so high that it's becoming unaffordable. Now, again, if you can afford to buy, I always say this, you date the rate, you marry the house. Okay.
Mm.
Interest rates, if they adjust in a lower, good, do it. But price points have gone up so high in relation to interest rates that, again, short of there being a global meltdown, and again, the market has slowed down, it's cooled off significantly. Okay.
Mm.
You have more licensed real estate agents than you have properties in the market. Okay. That's an interesting, kind of number. You also have, I saw a study that said, I think, was it 3 or 4 years ago, you had, I'm not sure this is, I believe this is in Florida. You had like 400,000 loan officers. Now you have like 99,000. Okay. So
Wow.
a third of the business is still in business. So
Wow.
2/3 of the business is out. So what are those people doing? Did they not build a war chest? I mean, again, it's difficult to give someone a mortgage when the majority of America has a lot of equity in their homes and they're at sub 4%, sub 3% interest rates. Those people aren't moving, short of there being a life event, right? Life event
Right.
meaning they have to move for job transfer, death, divorce, the 3 Ds. people are not moving, because the question that we keep hearing is, where am I going to move to? What am I going to buy? I'm going to sell my house, great, but where am I going to move to? Because is it going to be commensurate? So again, how did I shift and adapt to this? As a builder, I control my market. You know, the difference between you and I, Joe, as an example, you want to go out and buy a property. Okay, number one, good luck. Number two, at the price point you're going to buy a home, I'm building a home for probably at the price you're going to be buying that at, or significantly lower, and my equity is already built in. Okay. That's my major competitive advantage over everyone else in the marketplace, is that I am building for so low that, we're putting a new product in the marketplace, and I don't have to put CapEx into it, at least for a number of years.
Right.
Okay. And we're building homes with built-in 25, 30, 40%, increased margins over what you're doing. You're buying it to then dump money into it, which is never going to compete with my new construction home for the most part. So where do I see the market going? It's interesting. I hate to say that I don't know, because the only thing we can do as investors is adapt with what's going on. Here's what I mean by that. If we get rid of income taxes, which I hope we do, but if we get rid of all this, my mind's already going, wait a minute, how do we report taxes then? And how does this work for people that are going to qualify for homes? So
Mm.
if banks are making their decisions based on tax returns, as an example, what's going to happen should we get rid of that? That's a whole new underwriting thing that we're going to have to overcome, right? How are we going
Mhm.
to do this? So my mind's
Mhm.
spinning again in all these different variables, wondering, what's next. I think that as investors, okay, it's our job to spot the opportunities in crisis. Okay. The only way you're going to stay in business is by being nimble. And I say this all the time. Do you remember that company that you would get penalized if you didn't rewind? What was that? Please be kind and rewind.
Yeah, Blockbuster.
Oh, yeah. They're not in business anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Should have been the Netflix. They should
Right.
have been the Netflix. And Toys R Us, they're no longer in business. Why? Because I always did it this way. The
Right.
entrepreneurs that stay in business, okay, stay in business because they're shifting. The same way you alluded to, hey, the market is calling for bankruptcies and short sales and foreclosure defense. That's where the spigot is turned on, right? Hey, that market's dried up. We're doing our traditional real estate closings. So, congratulations, because you adapted to the marketplace. And the ones that didn't are the ones that are, having a job somewhere else with probably something negative to say about the business. Oh,
Mhm.
it doesn't work, you can't make money, or it's too high risk. Yeah, of course. Of course it is. If that's what you believe. And it can be. But those who stay in this business will prevail because they're going to shift and adapt to the market as best as you humanly can. I mean, no one's perfect, and you don't always win. You're never, there's remember, in every single baseball game, football game, basketball game, there's a winner and there's a loser. Okay. You
Mhm.
lost that game. You didn't lose a season. You lost the game. But unfortunately, when we're dealing with life, those losses could be catastrophic. And rebuilding is something that can take some time. But remember, on average, the lifespan of a man is what, 75, 80 years old or whatever. It's increasing. We have a long span. I saw there's a guy online, Howard Payne, big old teeth. I don't know, he got them done. I don't mean to say it negatively, but I saw this guy running around doing one of his videos. And while the video was a little cheesy this morning, I smiled because I said, I'm going to tune into this message because he's saying something to me. And again, I tuned into the frequency. And even though it was a little cheesy, he's sending a message to people that need to hear it. And that message was, in 2010, he was 600 grand in debt. He was upside down. He was at a loss. And here he is buying $100 million property. Okay. Showing how Moroccans flew into California and built this property. And he's got a sick property in South Florida, and he's got all the toys, the SF90, he's got all the toys. This guy created that silly thing that you plank on, you work out your core, and it's got a little video game on there. So yeah, that's the guy who created that. He goes, I went from zero to hero. I went from 600 grand in debt in 2010 to 2015 in a 5-year span. So again, not overnight, not
Mhm.
next month, not next quarter, not next year, but over 5 years of him investing in himself and believing in himself, he turned negative 600 grand into a success story. And how many times have you heard of that
Mhm.
happening? It happens all the time. Why? Because people just don't give up on themselves. That's the only thing. I've taken many, many licks, but I believe in myself. I'm going to keep betting on myself. And you can't go wrong investing and betting in yourself.
What do you think is the best investment in yourself that you've made over the years?
Continuing to educate myself, and pouring into myself. I have, again, I'm a pilot, I'm a state certified general contractor, I'm a mortgage broker, I'm a real estate broker, I'm a title agent. I've got every license you can possibly think of. And I'm still constantly going, what's the next thing I can get? What's next? What's next? Because I don't want to turn this off. I'm constantly educating myself. I try to, as best as possible, be a student of life. It's the simplest way I could say it is, again, without getting stuck on the shiny object syndrome, listening and learning and understanding how people are doing things and going, shit, that's pretty interesting. That's unique. That's a really creative way of doing something. That's it. Just constantly investing in yourself. You can't go wrong investing in yourself. But take a step back. They say that knowledge is power. We've all heard that, and I think it's bullshit. And you've heard a lot of people say that too. Applied knowledge is power. There's no point in you learning how to flip a house if you're never going to take that chance and flip a house. You start boxing, everything's fun until you get punched in the face. You're like, wait a minute, I don't want to fight anymore. But if that's what you're training for, that's what you've got to do. You have no idea how many times I've been to seminars and all this stuff, and I've seen people buy courses and become course junkies, and they take it, they put it on the shelf, and they're going to one day do this. I have family that I'll never forget that they leveraged themselves. They put all these Carlton sheets back in the day, bought the course and never did anything with it. And I just thought that was just, mind blowing. I bought my first course with money I didn't have from a guy who didn't put it together well. And I could have been, well, first of all, I was pissed, but I could have just socked it away and just said, this isn't going to work. But I bridged the gap. Because I said, this is what I need to know. This is what I need to do. I need to learn how to do this. And I bridged that gap. I was like, wait a minute. It's almost like if A and C is here, what's missing? The letter B. I got to figure that out. It's just kind of algebra or whatever the case is. You do the next logical step and whatever life's going to be. Again, I was too proud to go to meetups. I was too nervous. I remember moving to Central Florida and back in the day, I think it was Red Carpet Wednesdays or whatever it was, and they bounced around. And I remember driving to someplace in Baldwin Park for my first networking meeting, nervous as hell, not knowing anyone. I'd moved to Central Florida. I'd lost my house. I didn't have a whole network. My whole family, my whole life was in South Florida. And here I am in Central Florida after losing my place, walking into a networking thing without a dollar to my name, barely had the gas money to get there, going, what am I going to do? And by the way, I don't look like the nicest guy in the world. Ever since I got back from Iraq, I look stern, I look mean. I'm pretty chill, but usually people are like, oh, this guy looks really intense and really, whatever. And I've learned to embrace that. Nevertheless, it's still, people turn around, they're like, he looks upset. Let me not say hi to that guy. So I've got to go over the top. Hey, how are you guys doing? But that wasn't easy for me, and I know that networking is not easy. And I did a whole class on this. Networking is a contact sport. It's a contact sport. You have to go out there. Hey, how you doing? My name is Rob. What do you do? And again, learning and continuing to read books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, and then deploying those strategies. That book, by the way, great book. That book led me to meet my first billionaire, and that billionaire led me to own multiple rental properties. And based on that book, taking action on that book, learning, reaching out to a billionaire who took me as his mentee, he was my mentor. That meeting changed my entire life, okay? Because I took action. I could have simply read the book and said, okay, that's good. Next book. No. Dude, if you're going to take time to invest in yourself, deploy the strategies you're doing. It's almost like, if you look at a military soldier, what do they have? They've got their magazines right here. They might have a sidearm. They have their AR-15. They might have a knife. They might have that. They've got multiple tools available. If you have a handyman on a job site, you picture the guy with a tool belt. What does he have? He's got multiple tools. As an entrepreneur, you need to have multiple tools, okay? So if you're on this journey to being an entrepreneur, or you're a real estate wholesaler and that's all you know, understand that it's your responsibility to continue to keep adding tools to your tool belt, because I'll tell you right now, it's really, really hard trying to hammer in a nail with a screwdriver.
Well, and I think you've illustrated very well the old saying that a vision without implementation and execution is nothing more than a dream. Eventually you've got to use the tools available to you, and you've got to go do it. You can't just keep having visions and dreaming and dreaming and dreaming. At some point, you've got to implement, you've got to execute, and you've done that. And one of the things you talked about there, and one of the things I always end every show with, since our mission is to help people aspire to a better life, I always ask, who is someone in your life, a mentor, parent, friend, whoever, who is that person who helped you aspire to a better life, and how'd they do it?
There's a lot of people that have had an impact on my life, whether they know it or not. And that's, it's a beautiful part because, you can learn a lot from a distance. And the one thing I've learned in the military, at least I learned it in the military, is that you can learn as much from bad leadership as you can from good leadership. Nonetheless, my Uncle Rick is a man that I saw from a distance that, and I say from a distance because, I ran away from home when I was 14 years old and never went back. And that was a challenge and obstacles I had to overcome. Nevertheless, looking back, my uncle had an amazing relationship with his wife, my aunt. He is an incredible father to his kids, and they have an amazing relationship. When I was getting out of the military, he is a man who had a successful insurance business and had been in that same location now for over 35 years. He also was in the mortgage industry. And from a distance, I looked at him, and by all outward appearances, he was successful. And when I was younger, I was a knucklehead, so I didn't get along with quite a few people. Hence, I left at 14 years old because I thought I knew it all. But my Uncle Rick is a good friend and a good mentor to me. I love the relationship he has with his wife. I love the relationship he has with his kids. And that's something that I aspire to continue to try to be. And that's all you can do is to, try to emulate people that impact your life in a positive way, whether they know it or not. Because there's a lot of people that look at guys, whomever, Donald Trump, whatever, and say, I'm going to try to pursue that. And you should. If there's things that, you like in terms of character or work ethic or whatever the case from people, number one, it's nice to acknowledge it and share that with someone, because sometimes, and this, I'm sure, Joe, from a leadership position or even from an authority, having a podcast or whatnot, the guests that you have here and the messages that you deliver impact the lives of others, and it's sometimes nice to hear, hey, I appreciate that show that you did that gave me that encouragement, or those words of advice helped me do this deal, or whatever the case, that put money in my pocket. And sometimes you're like, oh, that's nice, that's great. But that little advice changed the world for that person. That deal and that money they made helped that person, whatever, pay their mortgage or invest in their business that helped them 10x it, or whatever the case is. So I would say that if there's someone I could think of right off the top of my head, my Uncle Rick, and I'll leave it there.
Well, Rob, I want to thank you so much for coming on, exemplifying that abundance mentality, sharing these nuggets of knowledge that you have today with everybody, with our audience, is invaluable. And I want to thank you again for coming. And if everyone out there ever needs to get in touch with Rob or learn any more, we have down in the show notes, we'll have links to everything that we talked about today. If you heard a book mentioned, anything like that, all of that's going to be down in the show notes. So please, I hope you all got something out of this. And until next time, I want everybody to just trust this. Thanks for listening to this edition of Trust This. If you got something out of it, please press like and subscribe and give us a 5-star review to help us reach others who can benefit from this series. Until next time, keep aspiring to a better life.